Joaquin Guzman was public enemy number one.
Making billions of dollars, having a reach around the world in Asia, Australia, Africa, in Europe.
He's a monster that happened to rise up in a criminal organization that was making billions of
dollars.
Putting
poison on the streets, not just in the United States, but all over the world.
Earned that status by putting more narcotics on American streets than anyone in history.
A monster.
A myth grew that he was untouchable.
In the early dawn of January 8th, 2016, gunfire echoes through the coastal city of Los Mochis, Sinaloa. Mexican Marines in black tactical gear storm a nondescript safe house. Breaching doors amid a hail of bullets, inside covers the most wanted drug lord on the planet, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman.
Probably one of the most vicious, well-organized bad guys this world's ever seen.
There, unrest, they see El Chapo. Joaquin was arrested with tears in his eyes. Nothing but shock and distress. How could this have happened? What if I told you that El Chapo was betrayed by his most close associate, someone who he thought of as his son? How was this kid able to take down the most infamous and biggest drug cartels in the entire world? In this video, we'll explore the college kid who was able to take down the mafia and one of the biggest drug kingpins in history. The story of kidnappings, attempted murder, and of course, drugs. How a college kid exposed the biggest drug cartel in history. But to do this, we have to wind back, specifically to an era that would change it all. 1977, Joaquin had started to build a name for himself, as he was known to be very diligent and coordinated. You see, during this time, drugs were growing at a demand, but they were very, very localized. These drugs were exported primarily to the US West Coast, often through small-scale routes. There also just wasn't very much variety, mostly just selling marijuana. Joaquin always knew he was made for this business. Even as a kid, he would sell the opium poppies, which would then be made into heroin. But he had his eyes set on something else. Soon, he helped form the Guadalajara cartel, and after its breakup, built Sinaloa into a transnational drug empire. By the 90s, he was one of the world's richest and most wanted traffickers, worth close up to $1 billion. But all good things come to an end, as he was first arrested in 1993 after a shootout with a rival gang. A cardinal who was mistaken for Guzman was killed, and then he was soon imprisoned in Mexico. Well, at this time, this could have been one of his lowest moments, but it wasn't. It was a vacation. He would continuously bribe guards and was living lavishly with a huge flat screen TV beside his bed. But he would soon meet a fate much worse. In January 2001, he escaped prison, reportedly escorted out in a laundry cart. For the next decade, he eluded authorities using safe houses and bribery, but this was becoming an issue. The biggest drug cartel leader had just escaped from prison and was now free. In 2012, a $5 million award was offered for information leading to his capture by the US. The only issue was, at the time, the Mexican government was heavily corrupt, with El Chapo often being able to bribe and get warnings ahead of time in case of a search. El Chapo honestly was just bigger than the government themselves at this point, so he was obviously very, very difficult to capture and honestly get a hold of. On the 22nd of February in 2014, Mexican Marines were able to seize Guzman at a beachfront condo in Mazatlan, Sinaloa, tracing a signal from a bodyguard's satellite phone. El Chapo, following this, was sent to a high-security Altiplano prison, and this is the part where El Chapo's story sadly comes to an end. Only if he didn't escape again, which he did. El Chapo once again used his uncanny ability to slip away from the high security prisons. In July 2015, while serving time at Altiplano, Mexico's most secure lockup, Guzman vanished from his cell without a trace. Guards found only a gaping hole under the shower floor, one of Guzman's infamous tunnel escapes. Guzman had orchestrated a sophisticated mile-long tunnel dug under the prison, emerging in a half-built safe house outside the perimeter. The passage was ingeniously equipped with electric lightning and ventilation, allowing him to breathe and navigate underground. In fact, in the tunnel, investigators later found a motor motorcycle mounted on rails, a lift left by his supporters and even fellow prison officials whose sole job was to keep him in prison. And even they aided the drug lord out. The breakout embarrassed the Mexican government and exposed deep corruption. More than 30 people, including prison officials, were later arrested for aiding him in his escape. This was basically Chapo's way of saying he could escape any prison under any circumstance and doing it his way. Guzman's tunnel escape just kicked off a massive manhunt across Mexico. Humiliated by the breach, President Enrique Peña Nieto's government flooded the Sierra Madre cities with troops determined to recapture the drug lord who had made the state look utterly powerless. For months, El Chapo went ghost mode, but not in the way you think. He wasn't hidden in some underground bunker, but rather shielded by a network of informants and locals that saw him as their Robin Hood. After a 6-month manhunt, security forces found him in early January 2016, but not in the way you would expect. 3:30 a.m. In a pre-dawn operation on January 8th, 2016, Mexican Marines raided a safe house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. Guzman was heavily guarded, as there was a massive shootout that took place at the home. Guzman, thinking on his feet, was able to flee through one of his sophisticated tunnels. He was able to escape and go through the storm drains, and later emerged on the street in a stolen car. And despite this escape, he was intercepted and arrested. Plus, 5 of his gunmen were killed and several more were captured in the fight. President Peña Nieto announced mission accomplished as Guzman was returned to Altiplano, but they took extra measures this time, as the Mexican government wasn't the only one who had an issue with Guzman, as he was also the main supplier of cocaine to the US. He was extradited to the United States in early 2017 and sentenced to life in 2019. Now, this sounds like a happy ending. Bad gangster criminal mafia boss is caught, everybody's arrested, and the people affected him are now safe. But Guzman had dozens of children, 4 of which are prominently in the cartel, all of which were groomed for the family business. Insight Crime reports that Ivan, Jesus, Alfredo, and Ovidio were brought into the Sinaloa's cartel operations at a young age as teenagers by their father and El Mayo, each of which had significant cartel roles. What if I told you that the downfall of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the most infamous drug lord in modern history? What if I told you that after all these grand escapes and crazy gunfights and insane situations with El Chapo Guzman, what if I told you that all of these crazy situations, these tunnel escapes, these prison escapes, and these gunfights were not the reason El Chapo got caught? What if I actually told you the downfall of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the most infamous drug lord in modern history, the real cause of his arrest? It wasn't just the result of elite military strategy or high-tech surveillance, because clearly that did not work. What if I told you it came from someone he knew well, and from his own blood? Now picture this. You're El Chapo. You escaped prison twice. The entire world is hunting you. You're paranoid. You're moving constantly, house to house, going back and forth. And your sons? They want an empire, not just a piece, all of it. And it starts with Joaquin Guzman Lopez. You see, Lopez knew exactly where Chapo was hiding, and the authorities admit they had no prior knowledge of Chapo being there. So Lopez had led the authorities, who were initially looking for the Sinaloa cartel, down the path of El Chapo. Now you may be asking why. Well, following El Chapo's extradition to the United States in 2017, his sons, known collectively as Los Chapitos, Ivan, Archivaldo, Jesus Alfredo, Ovidio, and Joaquin Jr. assumed greater control over the Sinaloa cartel. They expanded the cartel's operations, particularly in the production of distribution and synthetic opioids like fentanyl, solidifying their positions as key figures in the organization's new hierarchy. So the brothers had a clear motive and executed. Well, the story of El Chapo has no happy ending. We can now that what was taking place is honestly kind of sad. Family by blood would take down their own father if it meant riches and power would come along with it. This is the legacy of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, a man who escaped every prison except the ties of family and the wages of betrayal.